I'm going to go over an article that was sent to me by a friend. It's a little bit special. It's clearly well written. I think this journalist Matty Friedman must be very intelligent. No doubt about that. So it's quite a long article. You can see here 13 pages. Okay, the font is quite big, but it's a longer article. But I highlighted a few things, and I would really like to have some input. I would like to know what other people think about this. So she starts out with saying that in the West there's a hostile obsession with Jews. And it goes on. When I was a correspondent at the AP, the agency had more than 40 staffers covering Israel and the Palestinian territories. There was significantly more news staff than the AP had in China, Russia, or India, or in all of the 50 countries of sub-Saharan Africa combined. It was higher than the total number of news-gathering employees in all the countries where the uprisings of the Arab Spring eventually erupted. Now, my normal reaction to this is that I see this as whining by Israel, like, oh, why don't you let us do our thing without breathing down our neck? Stop watching our shit show. Go watch other people's shit show. By the way, this is an article from 2014, so the Israel invaded the Gaza Strip in 2014 in response to rockets by Hamas, and more than 1,000 people died. If I remember correctly, it was 1,400 or something. So, but the logic behind this article, I think, is still relevant, or you could still apply it today. So, when Israel flares up, as it did this summer, so of 2014, reporters are often moved from deadlier conflicts. Israel still trumps nearly everything else. There's no contesting that. Many people are dying in Africa, in Congo. Um, Here she says, in contrast, in 3 years, the Syrian conflict has claimed an estimated 190,000 lives, or about 70,000 more than the number of people who have ever died in the Arab-Israeli conflict since it began a century ago. It's not completely true. For my case, that I'm much more passionate about Israel Palestine. I am, but as a journalist, I remember interviewing at least two people about the conflict in Syria. I was interested in it. I wanted to know more about it. I also read articles. I also watched documentaries about this. I talked to somebody from Syria back then. He was my student in Brussels. I asked him about it. He happened to be positive about Assad and told me that even though there's a war, there are large parts of Syria where things are relatively quiet. So me personally, I'm also interested in this, but I agree, yes, in general, way more attention goes to Israel. So here she writes, in all of 2013, for example, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict claimed 42 lives. That is roughly the monthly homicide rate in the city of Chicago. Now, here you could criticize her for taking the death toll as the only indicator that something is worthy of being reported on. Okay, but yeah, in general, yeah, the bloodier conflicts, the more you expect journalists to write about it. So news organizations have nonetheless decided that this conflict is more important than, for example, the more than 1,600 women murdered in Pakistan last year, 271 after being raped, and 193 of them burned alive. It's true, not much attention goes to that. That's true. The ongoing erasure of Tibet, yeah, that used to be a little bit more popular than it is now, I think, or more attention went to that. The carnage in Congo, yeah, that's very underreported. I don't know why exactly. Maybe racism. Maybe it's harder to have lots of journalists there. But I suppose the main reason is that people don't care that much. Huh? It's terrible. Central African Republic, drug wars in Mexico. Okay, some attention goes to that. And conflicts no one has ever heard of in obscure corners of India or Thailand. They believe Israel to be the most important story on earth or very close. Yes, many people are interested in that, but that region, she doesn't mention that here, but that region does have lots of holy places. Lots of people care about this. This conflict has been going on for a long time. There has been lots of conflict in that region forever. Even as a young child, I associated that region of the world with conflict. It was in my comic books. It was in my um, in the books I read, in stories. People made jokes about this on television. So maybe that's one of the reasons why so much attention goes to it. As you will see, she has a very different idea about why so much attention goes to this conflict. Okay, so if you follow mainstream coverage, you will find nearly no real analysis of Palestinian society or ideologies, profiles of armed Palestinian groups, or investigation of Palestinian government. So just now, before I made this video, I went over a profile of Hamas in one of Belgium's dailies. It's true, though. I agree that usually the Palestinians are presented as one bloc and they suffer and they would like to live in peace. And some of them choose to react violently, and that's usually explained. Yeah, of course, they react violently, they're being oppressed. So, yes, it doesn't go much further than that. I do agree there. You don't get that many portraits of Palestinians who tell their own story or who have different ideas. I think this is correct. Palestinians are not taken seriously as agents of their own fate. I agree there. They're the big victim. And the West has decided that Palestinians should want a state alongside Israel. So that opinion is attributed to them as fact, though anyone who has spent time with actual Palestinians understands that things are, understandably, in my opinion, more complicated. Who they are and what they want is not important. The story mandates that they exist as passive victims of the party that matters. So I agree here that if you read a lot of reporting on this conflict, you could easily experience the Palestinians as the passive victims of everything that's happened. Corruption, for example, is a pressing concern for many Palestinians under the rule of the Palestinian Authority. But when I and another reporter once suggested an article on the subject, we were informed by the bureau chief that Palestinian corruption was not the story. Israeli corruption was, and we covered it at length. She doesn't say this, but one explanation for this is that Israel is this big beacon of democracy, and we should hold it to a higher standard. And Israel presents itself as something more, as something better, so we should also hold it to a higher standard. Does that mean that the Palestinians get a free pass, for example, when their leadership is corrupt? Yeah, maybe. I don't know why there are no more in-depth reports or articles about the corrupt Palestinian leadership. I think even Palestinians will agree that, for example, the Palestinian Authority is corrupt. But if you ask me about details, I also don't know because there don't seem to be that many articles about it. It's something that is assumed. Palestinian Authority is very corrupt, but who cares? Because that's usually not where the accent is put, or what people focus on. Then Israeli actions are analyzed and criticized, and every flaw in Israeli society is aggressively reported. In one 7 week period from November the 8th to December the 16th, 2011, I decided to count the stories coming out of our bureau on the various moral failings of Israeli society, proposed legislation meant to suppress the media, the rising influence of Orthodox Jews, unauthorized settlement outposts, gender segregation, and so forth. Yeah, there's lots of that. So um, I think thanks to all these articles, the first things I think about when I hear the word Israel, they're very negative. I absolutely, they're very negative. Um, I counted 27 separate articles on average of a story every 2 days. In a very conservative estimate, this 7 week tally was higher than the total number of significantly critical stories about Palestinian government and society, including the totalitarian Islamists of Hamas that our bureau had published in the preceding 3 years. And the Hamas Charter, for example, calls not just for Israel's destruction, but for the murder of Jews and blames Jews for engineering the French and Russian revolutions and both world wars. The charter was never mentioned in print when I was at the AP, so the Associated Press. The Hamas emplacement, this is about the tunnels, so Hamas is constructing tunnels, and she claims the Hamas emplacements were not important in themselves and were therefore ignored. What was important was the Israeli decision to attack them. So what Palestine does is not important. It's only important that Israel decides to attack, is what she's claiming. Um, so here she says that there's censorship when you report on Hamas, and that's not, nothing is done about that. She says the policy was then and remains not to inform readers that the story is censored unless the censorship is Israeli. This I find a little bit strange, that journalists are scared to report about on what Hamas is doing, and specifically that Hamas fighters were dressed as civilians and being counted as civilians in the death toll. Yeah, maybe I don't know, that I'm not sure about. I'm not so sure of that. The fact is that Hamas intimidation is largely beside the point because the actions of Palestinians are beside the point. Most reporters in Gaza believe their job is to document violence directed by Israel at Palestinian civilians. That is the essence of the Israel story. In addition, reporters are under deadline and often at risk, and many don't speak the language and have only the most tenuous grip on what is going on. They are dependent on Palestinian colleagues and fixers. Fixers are locals who help journalists book appointments, help them in any capacity to do their work as a journalist. I am a fixer in Slovakia, so I know what a fixer is. Who either fear Hamas, support Hamas, or both. Okay, I'm understanding it a little bit better. Why there's such a thing as or could be such a thing as censorship when it comes to reporting on Hamas. Reporters don't need Hamas enforcers to shoo them away from facts that muddy the simple story they have been sent to tell. It's no coincidence that the few journalists who have documented Hamas fighters and rocket launches in civilian areas this summer were generally not, as you might expect, from the large news organizations with big and permanent Gaza operations. They were mostly scrappy, peripheral, and newly arrived players, a Finn, an Indian crew, a few others. These poor souls didn't get the memo. This is actually funny. So, these poor souls didn't get the memo. Then, in early 2009, for example, two colleagues of mine obtained information that Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert had made a significant peace offer to the Palestinian Authority several months earlier, and that the Palestinians had deemed it insufficient. This had not been reported yet, and it was, or should have been, one of the biggest stories of the year. Never heard of this, but yeah, never heard of this. And I was there in 2009. I didn't hear anybody talk about some kind of peace offer. So some staffers were furious, but it didn't help. Our narrative was that the Palestinians were moderate and the Israelis recalcitrant and increasingly extreme. And then the framing of the story. The conflict is more accurately described as Israel Arab or Jewish Arab. That is a conflict between the 6 million Jews of Israel and 300 million Arabs in surrounding countries. Here, I don't necessarily agree. Um, we have seen that Arab countries don't really do that much to support the Palestinians. So perhaps Israel Muslim would be more accurate to take into account the enmity of non-Arab states like Iran and Turkey, and more broadly, 1 billion Muslims worldwide. I agree that there's quite a bit of enmity, of course, but how that translates into actual support for the Palestinians on the ground is not so clear. This is the conflict that has been playing out in different forms for a century before Israel existed, before Israel captured the Palestinian territories of Gaza and the West Bank, and before the term Palestinian was in use. So, here, I think what many people think is that the Jews moved in, massacred the locals, known as the Nakba, and they stole all the land, and they keep stealing land, and if the Palestinians resist, they are awful terrorists. Um, so it's more complicated than that. The surrounding Arabs also tried to kick out the Jews, and here I'm still not completely sure what exactly happened and who did what first, but that there was just a one-sided uh, genocide there, or that is Nakba was purely the Jews attacking Arabs in the area, doesn't seem to match with all the historical facts. So I don't know what would have happened if the Arabs had won. So maybe would have been the other way around, and their villages would have been destroyed, because it's not contested that many villages, some say 500 Palestinian villages, were destroyed in 1948. So the Israeli-Palestinian framing allows the Jews, a tiny minority in the Middle East, to be depicted as the stronger party. Well, what she doesn't mention here is that Israel is the only one in the region with about 90 nuclear weapons. So even though it's tiny, it has nuclear weapons. So of course, it's then it's then depicted as the stronger one, even if you say that it's 6 million Israelis against all Arab nations and Iran in the region and Turkey. And it does have a very strong military, at least on paper. But yeah, okay. So if you want to think that all surrounding Arab nations are openly hostile, but they're not doing much, in my opinion. Then a knowledgeable observer of the Middle East cannot avoid the impression that the region is a volcano and that the lava is radical Islam, an ideology whose various incarnations are now shaping this part of the world. So now we've heard this again, that this fight between Israel and Gaza is a fight between the let's say, civilized world against radical Islam, and if Israel is defeated, then you are next. So Israel is a tiny village on the slopes of the volcano. Hamas is the local representative of radical Islam and is openly dedicated to the eradication of the Jewish minority enclave in Israel, just as Hezbollah is the dominant representative of radical Islam in Lebanon, the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, the Taliban in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and so forth. So also this year we've seen Israel saying that Hamas and ISIS are the same. Purely technically, that's of course totally untrue. The two would probably most likely try to wipe each other out if you put them in together in one arena. So Hamas has destroyed the Israeli left, swayed moderate Israelis against territorial withdrawals, and buried the chances of a two-state compromise. That's one accurate way to frame the story. Yeah, I suppose that Hamas actions have indeed weakened the left in Israel. When minorities are helpless, their fate is that of the Yazidis or Christians of northern Iraq, as we have just seen, and when they are armed and organized, they can fight back and survive, as in the case of the Jews, and we must hope the Kurds. So back then, ISIS was going strong. They were taking over large areas. They controlled parts of Syria. They controlled large parts of northern Iraq, controlled quite a bit of oil. So that's what she means, like the minorities that fell into ISIS' hands and they couldn't fight back. They were treated extremely brutally. And so the implication is that if Israel couldn't defend itself, it would be dead. Maybe, not ruling that out at all. For centuries, stateless Jews played the role of a lightning. This is very interesting what she's saying. Played the role of a lightning rod for ill will among the majority population. They were a symbol of things that were wrong. Did you want to make the point that greed was bad? Jews were greedy. Cowardice? Jews were cowardly. Were you a communist? Jews were capitalists. Were you a capitalist? In that case, Jews were communists. So Hitler blamed the Jews for both capitalism and the advent of communism. So, were you a capitalist? In that case, Jews were communists. Moral failure was the essential trait of the Jew. It was their role in Christian tradition, the only reason European society knew or cared about them in the first place. So, I think originally, traditionally, Jews are seen as the ones that rejected the Messiah and helped crucify him. I think a lot of anti-Semitism started with that. Not an expert on that, on anti-Semitism. Like many Jews who grew up late in the 20th century in friendly Western cities, I dismissed such ideas as the feverish memories of my grandparents. One thing I have learned, and I'm not alone this summer, is that I was foolish to have done so. Today, people in the West tend to believe the ills of the age are racism, colonialism, and militarism. The world's only Jewish country has done less harm than most countries on earth and more good. I'd like her to break that down for us and make a list of the goods they have done. And yet, when people went looking for a country that would symbolize the sins of our new post colonial, post militaristic, post ethnic dream world, the country they chose was this one. So, some readers might remember that Britain participated in the 2003 invasion of Iraq, the fallout from which has now killed more than 3 times the number of people ever killed in the Israel Arab conflict. Yet in Britain, protesters furiously condemned Jewish militarism. Belgian reported, here I felt personally attacked, Belgian reporters condemn Israel's treatment of Africans. And there are a lot of people in Europe, and not just in Germany, who enjoy hearing the Jews accused of genocide. And having rehabilitated themselves against considerable odds in a minute corner of the earth, the descendants of powerless people who were pushed out of Europe and the Islamic Middle East have become what their grandparents were, the pool into which the world spits. The Jews of Israel are the screen onto which it has become socially acceptable to project the things you hate about yourself and your own country. The tool through which this psychological projection is executed is the international press. I have different theories as to why so many people uh, defend Palestinians. Um, she may be onto something here, maybe. I know there's a lot of virtue signaling going on online. Um, yeah, but I think there's also lots of genuine support for the Palestinians who are seen as a exceptionally oppressed people. But she may be onto something. Like, the strange thing for me is that I don't associate Israel so much with Jews. To, in, in the decades that I've supported the Palestinians, Israel to me is this entity that wants to control more land, and has a project as a nation where they have no use for Palestinians. But strangely, I don't think Jews so much when I hear the word Israel. But okay. So I should clearly adjust that, because Israel clearly presents itself as a place for Jews, obviously. For me, there are always Israelis. The people living there are Israelis first, and maybe Jews second, because a lot of non-Jews also live there. But maybe I should think differently there, because a gap has opened here between the two, between the ways things are and the way they are described. Opinions are wrong and policies are wrong, and observers are regularly blindsided by events. Such things have happened before. In the years leading to the breakdown of Soviet communism in 1991, as the Russia expert Leon Aron wrote in a 2011 essay for Foreign Policy, virtually no Western expert, scholar, official, or politician foresaw the impending collapse of the Soviet Union. The empire had been rotting for years, and the signs were there, but the people who were supposed to be seeing and reporting them failed, and when the superpower imploded, everyone was surprised. So here I think she wants to say that all these reporters have it wrong. They don't get what's going on. Their takes are wrong, and history will prove them wrong. She also mentions Spain's civil war. So uh, I think she wants to say that there's a big focus on only a tiny aspect of what's going on, and that the bigger story is Israel versus radical Islam. So here she says Israel is not one of the most important stories in the world, or even in the Middle East. Whatever the outcome in this region in the next decade, it will have as much to do with Israel as World War II had to do with Spain. Israel is a speck on the map, a sideshow that happens to carry an unusual emotional charge. Um, Again, then here my first reflex is to think, yeah, stop looking at us. Let us do what we want to do. Go and comment on something else. It's true that much more attention goes to this conflict, and that I understand that Israelis don't like it because they get a lot of criticism. Nobody enjoys that. So of course they want people to look away, and maybe can discuss why there is such unusually large attention for what's happening there, and not for other things. Many in the West clearly prefer the old comfort of parsing the moral failings of Jews and the familiar feeling of superiority this brings them to confronting an unhappy and confusing reality. They may convince themselves that all of this is the Jews' problem and indeed the Jews' fault, but journalists engage in these fantasies at the cost of their credibility and that of their profession. When thinking about Israel and Palestine, it's not so much Jews that I think about. I just see an oppressor and a victim. Okay, I was very biased, and I'm recently I've become more and more open to hear the other side of the story. Um, but it's hard for me to imagine that criticism of Israel is because people don't like Jews. I think people don't like what Israel is doing, but do they really have a problem with Jews? I've recently done a test at the request of a Jewish friend to see if I am racist towards Jews. According to that test, which you can take via the website of Harvard, I am apparently moderately biased towards Jews and Jewish symbols. So was not expecting that. I was expecting maybe some kind of slight bias, because everybody has maybe a slight bias towards a group they don't belong to. But clearly, I'm have not gotten to the bottom of this, neither in what is actually going on or in how I see this, or and why I see it the way I see it. So very intelligent article. I don't say I agree with everything she says. Food for thought. Not the final words by any means. So I would love comments, if or feedback. All very very welcome. And if you watched it till now, I thank you very much for your attention.